when 11-year-old Megan Torres pressed her palm against the tinted window of a white cargo van at a truck stop outside Amarillo, Texas, and mouthed the words that van has no windows to a tattooed stranger filling his motorcycle 3 pumps away. She didn't know that Garrett Lynch had spent 22 years as a detective with the Dallas Police Department before retiring to ride with the Lone Star Guardians MC. She didn't know that her desperate silent plea would trigger a 40-mile pursuit across the Texas Panhandle, a coordinated response involving 3 county sheriff departments, and the discovery that would unravel a trafficking operation that had been moving children across state lines for 8 months. She only knew that the van she'd been locked inside for 2 days had stopped for fuel, that the man who'd taken her had gone inside to pay, and that this might be her only chance to signal for help before the van disappeared back onto Interstate 40 and carried her farther from home. The Love's travel stop sat at the junction where U.S. Route 287 met Interstate 40, one of those sprawling truck stops that served as a way station for long-haul drivers, families on road trips, and anyone needing fuel and coffee during the endless stretch of highway that crossed the Texas Panhandle. It was 3:47 on a Thursday afternoon in early September, the kind of day where the heat shimmered off asphalt and made everything look slightly unreal. Garrett Lynch pulled his Road King up to Pump 9, grateful for the chance to stretch after 4 hours of riding from Lubbock. He was 53 years old, road captain for the Lone Star Guardians MC, with silver threading through his dark beard and the kind of lean build that came from years of staying active. His black leather vest bore the club's patches, a lone star against crossed highways, along with his military service marker from 2 deployments in Afghanistan and his years with Dallas PD. He'd retired from police work 3 years earlier after his daughter's death from leukemia, had made him reassess what mattered, had made him realize he needed to spend his remaining years doing something that felt meaningful without the bureaucracy and politics that had worn him down. The MC had given him that. A brotherhood of men who showed up for veterans events and community programs in each other when life got hard. Garrett was unscrewing his gas cap when he noticed the van. White cargo style with Texas commercial plates and no rear windows except for the small tinted ones on the back doors. Nothing unusual about that in itself. Plenty of contractors and delivery services used similar vehicles, but something about this one made his detective instincts flare. It was parked at Pump 6, engine running while the driver was inside, which wasn't strange except that the van was rocking slightly, like something or someone was moving inside. Garrett watched as a man emerged from the convenience store, mid-30s with a buzz cut and the kind of face that was aggressively average, carrying a coffee and a bag of chips. The man walked to the van with hurried steps, glancing around the parking lot in that way people do when they're checking to see if they're being watched. He climbed into the driver's seat and the van lurched slightly again, that same rocking motion. Garrett's attention sharpened. He'd worked enough cases to know when something felt off, when the normal rhythms of daily life contained a discordant note that suggested wrongness underneath. The van's passenger side window was down about 6 inches despite the heat, which was odd because most people would have the air conditioning running, and through that gap, Garrett could hear a sound, faint but distinct, a child crying. Not the angry wail of a kid who didn't want to leave the store or the tired fussing of someone who'd been traveling too long. This was the sound of someone crying in fear, trying to be quiet, failing. The driver of the van sat in his seat for a long moment, engine idling, and Garrett saw him turn toward the back of the vehicle and say something sharp that Garrett couldn't make out. The crying stopped immediately. That instant silencing that came from fear rather than comfort. Garrett moved closer, still holding his gas nozzle, pretending to check his bike's tire while keeping the van in his peripheral vision. And that's when he saw her. The girl's face appeared at the small tinted window on the back door, pale and desperate, her hands pressed against the glass. She was maybe 10 or 11 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that had come half undone. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. She looked directly at Garrett with an intensity that made his blood run cold, that made every instinct from his years working missing persons cases scream that something was catastrophically wrong. The girl's mouth moved, forming words with exaggerated care, making sure he could read her lips through the tinted glass. "That van has no windows," she repeated it, desperate and deliberate. "That van has no windows." Then her hands moved, pressing harder against the glass, and Garrett saw they were bound together with zip ties. The girl's eyes locked onto his for 3 more seconds, pleading and terrified, before she was yanked backward and disappeared from view. The van's back doors had been modified from the inside, Garrett realized. The windows were there from the outside for appearances, but the cargo area had been sealed off completely. No windows meant no way to see out, no way for anyone driving past to see in, no way for a child to signal for help except in the brief moments when the vehicle stopped and someone happened to be paying attention. Garrett's training took over before his conscious mind caught up. He memorized the license plate, noted the dent in the rear bumper and the faded company logo that had been poorly painted over on the side panel. He pulled out his phone and took a photo of the van from an angle that looked casual, like he was checking something on his bike. The driver was still sitting in the front seat, talking on his phone now, gesturing with one hand in what looked like an argument or urgent conversation. Garrett walked to his saddlebag, pulled out a small notebook, and wrote down everything. License plate, physical description of the driver, the make and model of the van, the time, the location. Then he called 911, keeping his voice low and calm in that way that came from years of making official reports. "This is Garrett Lynch, retired Dallas PD detective badge number 4721. I'm at the Love's Travel stop on Route 287, just south of Amarillo. I have a white cargo van, Texas commercial plates," he read off the number. "I just observed what appears to be a juvenile female, approximately 10 to 12 years old, bound with zip ties in the back of the vehicle. She mouthed to me that the van has no windows, and I observed that the cargo area appears to be modified with no visibility from inside. Driver is a white male, approximately 35 years old, 6 feet tall, medium build, buzz cut, wearing jeans and a gray t-shirt. Vehicle is currently at pump 6, engine running. I believe this is a possible abduction or trafficking situation, and I need units here immediately." The dispatcher's voice sharpened with the kind of focused urgency that came from recognizing a credible threat. "Sir, units are being dispatched from Potter County Sheriff. Can you maintain visual contact without engaging?" "I can and I will," Garrett said. "I'm on a motorcycle. If this van leaves before your units arrive, I'm following it and I'm not losing visual contact." "Understood. Stay on the line." Garrett watched as the driver ended his phone call, put the van in gear, and began pulling out of the fuel island. No time to wait for units that were probably still 10 minutes away. No time to do anything except act. Garrett fired up his Harley. The engines rumbled loud enough that several people at nearby pumps turned to look, and he pulled out behind the van, keeping 2 car lengths back as it merged onto the entrance ramp for Interstate 40 heading east. The dispatcher stayed on the line, her voice calm and professional as she coordinated with responding units. "Mr. Lynch, what's your location?" "Eastbound I-40, just past mile marker 76. Van is maintaining highway speed, about 70 miles per hour in the right lane. No indication the driver knows I'm following. Sheriff units are approximately 8 minutes out. We're setting up a coordinated response. I need you to maintain distance and do not attempt to stop the vehicle yourself." "Understood," Garrett said. "But if this van exits onto a county road or tries to reach a secondary location, I'm not waiting for backup. That girl doesn't have time for perfect protocol." The miles passed in a blur of asphalt and heat shimmer, the white van steady in Garrett's vision as he rode with the kind of focused intensity that made everything else fade into background noise. He'd made this calculation before, during his years as a detective, the math of risk versus reward, of following procedure versus doing what the situation demanded. He knew that technically he had no authority to pursue this vehicle, that he was a civilian now, that anything he did wrong could compromise a case or put that girl in more danger. But he also knew that cargo vans with no windows and bound children didn't stop at safe locations. They stopped at isolated places where victims disappeared completely. They stopped at handoff points where children were transferred to other vehicles and scattered across networks designed to make them vanish. Minutes mattered. Visibility mattered. And right now, he was the only person in the world who knew exactly where that van was and what it contained. The van took exit 89, the sign indicating a small town called Groom, population 562, 23 miles ahead. Garrett's gut tightened. Rural exit, small town, probably limited law enforcement presence. This was either the driver's destination or a navigation move to throw off any potential pursuit. Dispatcher, subject vehicle, just took exit 89 toward Groom, continuing to follow. Copy that. Potter County units are being redirected. We're also coordinating with Carson County Sheriff. Mr. Lynch, the driver may have spotted you. Can you drop back? Negative, Garrett said. If I lose visual on this van on county roads, that girl is gone. I'm staying close enough to maintain contact. The van turned onto Farm Road 2300, a two-lane county highway that cut through flat ranch land where cattle grazed behind barbed wire fences, and the horizon stretched empty in every direction. No other vehicles in sight. No witnesses. Just Garrett on his Harley and the white van carrying a terrified child who'd managed to signal for help in the brief window when her captor's attention had wavered. Garrett accelerated slightly, closing the distance to 1 car length. He wanted the driver to know he was there now, wanted the pressure of visible pursuit to force a mistake, or at least slow down whatever timeline the man was operating on. The van's brake lights flashed red as the driver noticed the motorcycle behind him. Then the vehicle accelerated, pushing 75 on a road that was posted for 55. Garrett matched the speed easily, his Road King more than capable of keeping pace. His phone was on speaker now, balanced in his handlebar mount, the dispatcher's voice clear as she coordinated the response. All units, suspect vehicle, is now on Farm Road 2300 traveling northeast at high speed. We have civilian maintaining visual contact. Air support has been requested. Mr. Lynch, can you confirm you're still in visual contact? Affirmative, Garrett said. Van just blew through a stop sign at the intersection of Farm Road 2300 and County Road 14. Still heading northeast, speed approximately 80 now. The van's driving became more erratic, weaving slightly, braking hard, and then accelerating again in the pattern of someone panicking and trying to make decisions while moving at high speed. Garrett could see the driver's head turning, checking mirrors, calculating options. The man knew he was being followed now and was trying to figure out if it was law enforcement or just some random biker who'd taken offense at something. Ahead, Garrett saw a dirt road branching off to the right, barely more than a track cutting through ranchland. The van's brake lights flashed again, and the vehicle slowed, turn signal blinking. No, Garrett thought, not a dirt road where you could disappear into miles of empty land. Not a place where you could dump evidence or harm that girl and be gone before anyone knew where to look. Garrett accelerated hard, pulling alongside the van's driver's side, close enough that the driver would have to see him, have to acknowledge the visible witness who wasn't backing off. He made direct eye contact through the van's window, pointed at the driver, then pointed at the road ahead with a gesture that was unmistakable. Keep going. Stay on this road. Don't even think about turning off. The driver's face showed a flash of anger, then calculation, then what looked like resignation. The van's turn signal went dark, and the vehicle continued straight on Farm Road 2300. Garrett dropped back slightly, maintaining position, his heart hammering in a way it hadn't since his last deployment in Kandahar, when every decision carried life or death weight. Behind him, in the distance, Garrett could see flashing lights finally appearing on the horizon. Sheriff units, at least 3 of them, closing fast. The van's driver saw them too, his head swiveling to check his rearview mirror, and Garrett saw the exact moment when the man realized he was boxed in with nowhere to go and no good options remaining. The van slowed, then pulled onto the shoulder of the road and stopped. Garrett stopped his bike 50 feet back, engine running, one hand on his phone ready to document everything. The sheriff units arrived within 90 seconds. 3 Potter County vehicles and 1 Carson County unit that had joined the response. Deputies emerged with weapons drawn, taking positions behind their doors, and the lead deputy used his PA system to issue commands. Driver, turn off the engine and show me your hands. Place your hands on the steering wheel where we can see them. The van sat silent for a long moment, engine ticking as it cooled, and Garrett could see the driver's silhouette through the windshield, frozen in indecision. Then, slowly, the man's hands appeared on the steering wheel, and the engine went silent. Driver, open your door from the outside handle and step out slowly. Keep your hands visible. The door opened and the driver emerged, hands raised, his face showing the kind of blank compliance that came from knowing resistance was pointless. Deputies moved in quickly, securing the driver with practiced efficiency, one officer reading rights while another conducted a pat-down search. The lead deputy, a woman in her 40s with sergeant stripes and the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades working rural law enforcement, approached Garrett while other officers secured the perimeter. "You're the caller, the retired Dallas detective," she said. It wasn't quite a question. Garrett Lynch, "Yes, ma'am." He handed her his phone showing the photos he'd taken at the truck stop and his notebook with the details he'd documented. "The girl is in the back of that van, hands bound with zip ties. She signaled to me at the Loves in Amarillo, told me the van has no windows. When I looked closer, I saw the cargo area has been modified. The windows are there on the outside, but the interior is sealed off completely." The sergeant's expression hardened. She turned to the other deputies. "Get that van open now and call for EMS and a victim advocate. We're going to need specialized response." Two deputies approached the van's rear doors with bolt cutters ready, and when they pulled the doors open, what they found made even these experienced officers go rigid with barely controlled anger. The cargo area had indeed been modified. Metal panels bolted over where the windows should have been, creating a sealed box with only minimal ventilation holes drilled near the roof. And sitting on the bare metal floor, zip-tied and terrified, was Megan Torres. She was wearing the same clothes she'd been taken in 2 days earlier, a purple hoodie and jeans that were now dirty and wrinkled. Her dark hair was tangled and her face was streaked with dried tears. But when she saw the deputies and the open doors and sunlight streaming in, her expression shifted from terror to desperate hope. The sergeant climbed into the van, her voice gentle in stark contrast to the command tone she'd used moments before. "Hey, sweetheart, my name is Sergeant Davis. You're safe now. We're going to get you out of here and get you home, okay? Can you tell me your name?" "Megan," the girl whispered. "Megan Torres. I'm from Albuquerque. He took me from the parking lot at my school 2 days ago. He said if I screamed or tried to get away, he would hurt my mom." Sergeant Davis carefully cut the zip ties binding Megan's wrists, then helped her out of the van, wrapping an emergency blanket around her shoulders even though the afternoon heat was still intense. The girl was shaking, her legs unsteady after 2 days of confinement. EMS arrived within minutes, along with a victim advocate from the Regional Child Protection Services. They began their assessment and documentation, while Sergeant Davis pulled Garrett aside. "That was some of the best civilian intervention work I've seen in 23 years, she said quietly. "You potentially saved that child's life. If this van had made it to wherever it was heading, if they'd completed the handoff or gotten her across state lines into Oklahoma, we might never have found her." "The driver was making calls at that truck stop," Garrett said, "arguing with someone. My guess is this was a pickup or delivery that was supposed to happen on a schedule and something went wrong." Davis nodded. "FBI is en route. This van is registered to a shell company out of Tulsa. We're thinking this is part of a larger operation. The driver isn't talking yet, but his phone is going to tell us everything we need to know about his network." Garrett watched as the EMTs finished their initial assessment of Megan, checking her for injuries and dehydration, while the victim advocate sat beside her, explaining what would happen next, where she would be taken, how her parents were being contacted. The girl kept looking over at Garrett, her eyes following him, even as adults surrounded her with care and professional competence. Finally, she said something to the victim advocate, who nodded and brought Megan over to where Garrett stood beside his motorcycle. "Megan wanted to talk to you," the advocate said gently. "If that's okay?" Garrett knelt down to Megan's eye level, the same way he'd done countless times with his own daughter, the same way he'd learned to approach frightened children during his years working cases that still haunted him. "Hey, Megan," he said quietly. "You did real good today. You were smart and brave, and you found a way to ask for help even when it was scary." Megan's chin trembled. "I thought maybe you wouldn't see me, or that you'd see me and think I was making it up. I tried to get other people's attention at a rest stop yesterday, but nobody looked. Nobody paid attention. But you saw me. I saw you," Garrett confirmed, "and I believed you, and I wasn't going to let that van disappear. You trusted your instincts, and you kept trying even when people weren't listening. That kind of courage is what saved you. My mom always told me to yell and make a scene if someone tried to take me, Megan said, tears starting to fall again. But he said if I did that, he'd hurt her. He showed me her picture on his phone and said he knew where she worked. So I stayed quiet and I tried to look for another way to get help. And then I saw you and your motorcycle and you looked strong and I thought, maybe you were someone who would listen. You thought right, Garrett said. And your mom is going to be so proud of you, not just for being brave, but for being smart enough to adapt when the situation changed. You're going to see her real soon. Megan nodded, wiping her face with her sleeve. And then she did something that Garrett hadn't expected. She stepped forward and hugged him, this terrified 11-year-old who'd been locked in a windowless van for 2 days, who'd managed to signal for help in the brief moment when hope appeared, who'd trusted a tattooed stranger on a motorcycle because something in her gut told her he was someone who would act. Garrett hugged her back, careful and gentle, and felt something crack open in his chest. Grief for his daughter, who he couldn't save from leukemia. Gratitude that today, in this moment, he'd been in exactly the right place to help someone else's child. The weight of knowing that if he'd looked away, if he'd dismissed what he saw, if he'd waited for someone else to handle it, Megan Torres would have vanished into a network designed to make children disappear forever. The victim advocate gently guided Megan toward the ambulance where she would be transported to the hospital for a full medical evaluation. Sergeant Davis stayed behind to coordinate with the FBI agents who were arriving, their dark SUVs pulling up with the kind of purposeful efficiency that suggested this case was about to expand well beyond one van and one driver. Over the next 3 hours, as Garrett gave his formal statement and turned over all his documentation and photos, the scope of what he'd stumbled into became clear. The van's driver was Robert Kemp, a 36-year-old with a record of prior arrests for fraud and theft who'd apparently graduated to trafficking. His phone contained communications with at least 4 other individuals across 3 states, all using coded language about pickups, deliveries, and transfers. The shell company that owned the van had purchased 6 similar vehicles over the past year, all modified the same way, with sealed cargo areas and minimal ventilation. The FBI agent in charge, a man named Torres, no relation to Megan, told Garrett that this single intervention had likely broken open a trafficking network that had been operating for at least 8 months and had moved an unknown number of victims. Some of those victims were still missing, their cases open and their families desperate. But now law enforcement had phones, communication records, vehicle registrations, and financial trails that would lead to others involved. Megan Torres had been taken from her middle school parking lot in Albuquerque on Tuesday afternoon. She'd been waiting for her mother to pick her up after volleyball practice when Kemp had approached her, showed her a photo of her mother that he'd obtained from social media, and told her that her mom had been in an accident and he was supposed to take Megan to the hospital. The girl had gotten into the van willingly, not realizing until too late that the story was a lie, that there was no accident, that her mother was fine and frantically searching for her missing daughter. For 2 days, Megan had been driven across New Mexico and into Texas, stopped only for brief bathroom breaks at isolated rest stops where Kemp kept her in sight, threatened her into silence, and moved her toward whatever destination had been planned. She'd tried to signal at a rest stop in Tucumcari, but the parking lot had been nearly empty, and the one person she'd attempted to get attention from had looked away, uncomfortable with the intensity of her stare. She'd tried again at a truck stop in Santa Rosa, pressing her face against the window and mouthing, "Help me." But the driver who'd been parked beside them had glanced over, seen nothing obviously wrong, and driven away without a second thought. It was only at the Loves in Amarillo, where Kemp had made the mistake of parking near a former detective with 22 years of experience reading people and situations, that Megan's signals had finally reached someone who understood what he was seeing and refused to look away. By evening, Megan had been reunited with her parents who'd driven from Albuquerque at speeds that probably violated every traffic law in 3 states. The reunion happened at a victim advocacy center in Amarillo, a building designed to be comfortable and safe for traumatized children. And when Megan saw her mother come through the door, she ran with a cry that was part relief and part the release of 2 days of terror that she'd been holding inside. Her mother, Jennifer Torres, dropped to her knees and wrapped her daughter in her arms, sobbing into Megan's hair while her husband David stood behind them with tears streaming down his face and his hands shaking with the aftershock of almost losing their child. They held each other for long minutes, and every law enforcement officer in that building had to look away because some moments were too raw and sacred to witness directly. When they finally pulled apart, Jennifer Torres looked around the room until she found Garrett. The FBI agent had told her what had happened, how a biker at a truck stop had seen Megan's signal, had recognized the danger, had pursued the van for 40 miles, and refused to let it disappear. She walked over, still holding Megan's hand, her face wet with tears. "You're the man who saved my daughter," she said, her voice breaking on every word. "Agent Torres told me what you did, how you saw Megan when other people looked away, how you followed that van and didn't stop even when it would have been easier to just call it in and let someone else handle it." Garrett shifted uncomfortably, never good with gratitude or recognition. "I just did what needed doing, ma'am. Your daughter's the brave one. She kept trying to signal for help even after people ignored her. She didn't give up." Jennifer pulled Garrett into a fierce hug. This woman who'd spent 2 days living in the hell of not knowing where her child was, or if she'd ever see her again, who'd been interviewed by police and kept her phone charged constantly and driven past places Megan might be and felt hope dying a little more with each hour that passed. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for paying attention. Thank you for believing her. Thank you for not being one more person who looked away." David Torres shook Garrett's hand, his grip tight and his voice rough with emotion. "If there's ever anything we can do for you, anything at all, you have a family in Albuquerque who will never forget what you did." Megan tugged on Garrett's vest, the same gesture she'd used when she wanted to talk earlier. "Can I show my parents your motorcycle?" "I told them about it, about how you followed us and didn't let him get away." Garrett smiled. "Yeah, kid. Let's go see the bike." Outside the Advocacy Center, in the parking lot where the evening sun was finally starting to cool and the sky was turning those shades of orange and pink that Texas did better than anywhere else, Megan explained to her parents in enthusiastic detail how Garrett had followed the van, how he'd pulled alongside when the driver tried to turn off, how the sheriff had arrived and opened the doors. Her trauma was still there, visible in the way she stayed close to her mother and flinched at sudden sounds. She'd need therapy and time and the kind of patient support that would help her process what had happened. But in this moment, she was just an 11-year-old girl excited about a motorcycle and grateful to be with her parents. "Can I sit on it?" Megan asked. Garrett looked at Jennifer and David, who both nodded. He lifted Megan onto the bike seat, and her face lit up with the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. "When I grow up, I'm going to have a motorcycle like this," Megan announced, "and I'm going to help people like you did. I'm going to be someone who pays attention when other people look away." "That sounds like a real good plan," Garrett said. The Torres family stayed in Amarillo for 3 days while Megan was evaluated by trauma specialists and gave her statement to FBI investigators. Before they left to drive back to Albuquerque, they met Garrett one more time at a diner. "We want you to be part of Megan's life, if that's okay with you," Jennifer said. "She talks about you constantly, about the biker who believed her when she needed someone to listen. We'd like to stay in touch if you're willing." "I'd be honored," Garrett said. Over the following months, the Torres family and Garrett maintained contact. They exchanged messages on holidays, birthday greetings, updates on Megan's recovery. The girl's trauma from the abduction required ongoing therapy, but she was healing, becoming confident again, speaking at her school about trusting your instincts and finding ways to ask for help even when traditional methods weren't available. The trafficking network that Kemp had been part of was systematically dismantled over 6 months of investigation. 7 other individuals were arrested across 4 states. 4 missing children were recovered, reunited with families who'd been living in the nightmare of not knowing. The modified vans were seized and destroyed, and every person involved in the investigation credited that initial intervention at a truck stop in Amarillo, one retired detective who'd paid attention when it mattered, as the domino that had started the entire operation's collapse. The Lone Star Guardians MC started a program after Megan's rescue called Windows Project, named after the phrase that had started everything. They ran community workshops teaching people to recognize signs of trafficking, abduction, and distress. They taught parents to teach their children that finding creative ways to signal for help in dangerous situations was smart and brave. They distributed cards with warning signs and reporting procedures. Over 3 years, 2 more Lone Star Guardians members recognized and intervened in suspicious situations based on that training. One was an attempted abduction at a shopping mall. The other was a teenager being transported against her will. Each time, someone paid attention. Each time, someone trusted their instincts. Each time, someone was willing to act even when it would have been easier to assume everything was fine. Each time, a life was saved. Garrett kept one thing from that day at the truck stop, a photo that Agent Torres had given him showing the moment Megan had pressed her hands against the van's tinted window and mouthed those 5 words, "That van has no windows." The image was grainy, pulled from security camera footage, but you could see the desperation in the girl's face and the way her bound hands were pressed flat against the glass. It hung in the Lone Star Guardians clubhouse with a caption that Megan had written 2 years later. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is find a way to ask for help when the obvious ways won't work. And sometimes the most important thing you can do is pay attention when someone is trying to be seen. When Megan turned 14, she showed up at a Lone Star Guardians community event wearing a t-shirt she'd designed herself. It showed a motorcycle following a white van with the words, "That van has no windows." If something feels wrong, trust your instincts. Someone is paying attention. Someone will help. She'd made 200 shirts and sold them all, donating every dollar to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. "I want other kids to know what I learned," Megan told Garrett. "That there are people watching. That finding creative ways to signal for help works. That you're never completely alone even when it feels like you are. That the person who saves you might not look like what you expect." Garrett looked at this young woman who'd been a terrified 11-year-old, pressing her hands against a van window, who'd been brave enough to keep trying even after multiple people had ignored her signals, who'd grown into someone who wanted to help other kids feel less alone and more empowered. "Your parents raised a remarkable person," Garrett said. "You helped raise me too," Megan replied. "You showed me what it looks like to care about strangers, to trust your gut when something feels wrong, to act when it matters. That's the kind of person I want to be." 'Cause that was the truth. One person paying attention could save a life. Trusting your instincts when something felt wrong was worth the risk of being mistaken. Following a van for 40 miles and refusing to let it disappear was a small price to pay if it meant a child went home to their parents instead of vanishing into a nightmare. The story of Megan and the windowless van became part of Lone Star Guardians' identity, a reminder that their community role wasn't just charity rides and veteran support. It was being present, aware, willing to act when vulnerable people needed someone to see them and take them seriously. Garrett continued to ride year after year with his brothers beside him, and the knowledge that his daughter's death hadn't been meaningless, that every person he helped in the years since was part of her legacy, part of the way love continued even after loss. And he carried in his vest pocket a school photo of a 14-year-old girl with dark hair and a bright smile, wearing a t-shirt that reminded everyone who saw it that paying attention matters, that trusting your instincts saves lives, and that sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is refuse to look away when a child is trying to tell you something is wrong.